You waited for their apology, like it was oxygen. You thought, if they could just admit what they did, if they could just see it, you could finally breathe again. You replayed it, the moment they walked away, the coldness, the silence that felt louder than any goodbye. You imagined them waking up one day, realizing they'd hurt you, regretting it, and maybe even coming back, with trembling words and soft eyes, saying everything they couldn't before. But that day didn't come, did it? And when it didn't, you started wondering what was wrong with you. Because that's what pain like this does. It flips the story and makes you the villain for loving too hard. But here's what no one tells you. Their apology isn't the ending you need. It's the one you think you need to make sense of what broke you. They'll apologize, but not when you're still waiting for it. Not when your healing depends on their awareness. Not when you're still trying to convince them that you deserve better. They'll apologize when you stop needing them to. When you finally stop standing at the door, they close themselves. Because for people like them, especially the ones who run from closeness, from accountability, from vulnerability, apologies aren't words. They're threats. To say I'm sorry means they have to feel it. To feel it means they have to see you. And to see you means they'd have to see themselves, the version of them that hurt you, lied to you, and called distance peace. And that's what terrifies them most. So instead, they rewrite the story. They call you dramatic, too emotional, unstable. They build their comfort on denial and call it healing. But here's the paradox. The moment you stop waiting for their apology is the moment their guilt starts whispering. Because silence doesn't stay quiet forever. Not when someone who once needed control starts realizing that the person they tried to forget learned how to live without them. They see it in the way you no longer reach out, in the way you stopped explaining, in the way your absence doesn't chase them anymore. And that's when it begins to haunt them. They'll remember how easily you loved them, how you gave them chances they didn't even ask for, how you held space for their pain, while they turned yours into an inconvenience. And it'll hit them, not because they suddenly became self-aware, but because your energy changed. You stopped needing their closure, and in that, you became everything they couldn't be. Accountable, grounded, and free. They'll scroll through your posts. They'll linger on your silence. They'll wonder who you're with now, but they won't admit it. They'll just sit in that strange ache that comes when pride and longing collide. And that ache is their apology beginning to take shape. Because avoidance always feels powerful until it's met with indifference, until the person they thought would always wait finally walks away, not in anger, but in peace. Peace they didn't believe you'd ever find without them. See, their power was never love. It was your need for it. It was your reaching, your fixing, your hoping. They thrived on the imbalance, the unspoken truth that you'd stay, even without being met halfway. And when you finally stopped, when you finally turned inward, they lost that supply. That's why they come back months later, with sudden softness, with I've been thinking about you, with half-truths dressed as confessions. They're not sorry because they understand what they did. They're sorry because you stopped being who you were. When they broke you, you stopped being the one who absorbed all the blame. You stopped being the one who believed love had to hurt first to mean something. They'll apologize when they feel your absence, more than they feared your truth, when their detachment no longer protects them from the emptiness they built inside. And by then, you won't need it, because the apology you've been waiting for won't come from their mouth. It'll come from your healing. It'll come from the day you wake up and realize you no longer want to explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. It'll come from the quiet joy of no longer checking your phone, of finally being bored of the pain, of realizing that closure was never about the past. It was about choosing yourself in the present. That's the real apology, not their words, but your freedom. And that's why it's always this way. They'll apologize when you stop needing them to, when you've already forgiven yourself for waiting as long as you did. There's something cruel about how silence lingers long after someone leaves. It's not just the quiet, it's what the quiet echoes. All the what ifs, all the maybe they'll come around, all the they just need time. You start bargaining with the universe. You start thinking love can't just vanish. Not after all that effort, not after all that truth. You replay every conversation. You look for signs you missed. You tell yourself maybe you were too much, too honest, too emotional, too something. Because if you can name the flaw, you can fix it. And if you can fix it, maybe they'll come back. That's what your mind says. That's what trauma whispers. That's what attachment does when love feels like survival. But here's the truth. You can't negotiate with avoidance. You can't love someone into self-awareness. You can't hold space for a person who treats presence like a threat. They didn't leave because you weren't enough. They left because love was starting to expose what they've spent years avoiding. When you loved them, they felt seen, and being seen felt unsafe because real love is a mirror. And when you held that mirror up, they saw their fears, their insecurities, their inconsistencies, their inability to connect. Without control, they called it too much. But what they really meant was too real. Because real love asks you to be there, not just when it's easy, but when it's uncomfortable. And for the avoidant, discomfort means danger. It means loss of control. It means they might have to feel. It means they might have to face the parts of themselves they've buried under logic, distraction, and pride. So they shut down. They pull back. They detach. They tell themselves they're protecting peace. But what they're really doing is protecting pain, because their version of safety was built on running. Running from parents who dismissed emotion. Running from moments that felt too heavy. Running from every person who tried to hold them still long enough to show them love wasn't the enemy. And when you came along, you didn't play by those rules. You asked questions. You leaned in. You didn't fear their distance. You wanted to understand it. That's what scared them. Because love wasn't supposed to look like that. Love, to them, meant needing. Needing meant weakness. And weakness was a memory they swore never to feel again. So when you tried to love them, they started fighting themselves. One part wanted to stay. The other wanted to disappear. And when the fear won, they left you, but told themselves they were just choosing peace. Peace isn't silence. Peace isn't absence. Peace isn't pretending someone didn't matter, just because it's easier to forget than to feel. Peace is acceptance, and they haven't reached that yet. But you have to understand, for someone who spent their whole life avoiding emotional truth, your presence was a storm. You didn't break them. You revealed them. And the moment you stopped trying to explain your worth, the moment you stopped fighting to be seen, something shifted. You started remembering what it felt like to be whole. Before they ever walked in, you started realizing that love doesn't have to be earned. It's meant to flow, to feel safe, to breathe. And as you started breathing again, they started holding theirs. Because avoidance only works when the other person stays desperate for clarity. They expect you to chase. They expect you to prove. They expect you to crumble. But when you don't, when you quietly choose yourself, without making it an announcement, they feel it. Every time you don't reply, every time you post something peaceful, every time they see that glow in your eyes again, that used to depend on their validation, it confuses them because they thought control was their way of staying safe. But now, They're realizing control became the very thing that left them lonely. They start wondering, why aren't they reaching out? Do they hate me? Are they over me? Did I really mean nothing? The same person who once claimed they didn't need anyone suddenly starts craving your energy again. But they can't admit that. So they stalk quietly. They test the waters with a random message. They bring up something meaningless, pretending it's casual. They'll say things like, I just saw something that reminded me of you. Or, I hope you're doing okay. It's not about checking on you. It's about checking if you're still theirs. Because their identity was never built on intimacy. It was built on control. Control through distance. Control through silence. Control through keeping you guessing. But when you step out of that dynamic, when you stop needing their words to heal, you take your power back, and they feel powerless for the first time. And that's when guilt begins to eat away at them. That's when regret stops being something they can outrun. Because deep down, they know you didn't deserve it. They know you tried. They know you were patient in ways no one ever was with them. But here's the twist. Their pride still won't let them say it. Not yet. Not until the silence hurts them more than your absence ever did. Not until the person who used to chase now chooses peace so quietly that it echoes louder than any fight ever could. That's when they'll start to realize they didn't just lose you, they lost the only place that ever felt like home, even if they couldn't admit it. And in that loss, the apology starts forming. Slow, painful, and silent. But it's okay, because you're not waiting anymore. You've already moved past the apology. You've already outgrown the version of yourself that needed it to make sense. You now understand. The apology was never for you to receive. It was for them to realize. When it's far too late to matter, there comes a point when waiting turns into remembering, when love stops being a future and becomes a memory, and you start to see them differently, not as the one who got away, but as the one who wasn't ready, not as a villain, but as someone who didn't know how to love without fear. That's when peace begins to replace pain, not all at once, but quietly. You wake up one morning and realize you didn't check your phone. You didn't scroll to see if they watched your story. You didn't write that message in your head again that you'll never send. You just breathed, and it feels strange at first, like something's missing. But what's missing isn't them. It's the chaos that came with needing them. Because needing them was never about love. It was about trying to finish a story that was never yours to fix. You wanted to help them heal. You wanted to show them that love could be safe. But that's the trap of empathy. You start trying to rescue the very person who keeps walking you into fire. And when you finally walk out, you realize something wild. You were never meant to prove love to them. You were meant to remember love for yourself. Because what you gave them wasn't ordinary. It was your energy, your time, your softness, your belief that love could still win. And even if they didn't stay, that energy didn't disappear. It returned to you, magnified, refined, and wiser. You start noticing things you missed before. How their space always came, right after intimacy. How their detachment always showed up when you stopped chasing. It wasn't about you being too much. It was about you being too close to the truth they've been avoiding. Because your love did something their ego couldn't handle. It exposed how lonely their control really was. They used logic like armor. They used silence like a shield. But deep down, their hearts still wanted to be held. They just didn't know how to receive it without feeling weak. So they pushed you away in the name of peace. But what they really found was emptiness. And that emptiness starts to whisper louder once you stop reaching out. Because when the person who always forgave them goes quiet, the silence turns into consequence. It's not revenge. It's reality. They start noticing the absence of your care, the way you used to ask about their day, the way you noticed the small things, the way you believed in them, even when they didn't believe in themselves. At first, they'll tell themselves they're fine without it. They'll fill the space with distractions, with validation, with the illusion of control. But it doesn't last, because every new face feels like a copy of what they already destroyed. And here's the cruel truth. No one misses love immediately. They miss attention. They miss comfort. They miss control. Love hits later. Love hits when they realize they can't recreate the connection they took for granted. When they scroll through old photos just to feel something again. When they reread old messages and see, maybe for the first time, that you were never the problem. They were the one who couldn't stay. But by then, you've already shifted. You've already learned the hardest lesson. That closure isn't something they give you. It's something you decide to give yourself. You stop waiting for, I'm sorry. You stop hoping they'll come back with a new heart, because the person they would need to become to truly love you doesn't exist yet. They would need to unlearn years of self-protection. They would need to feel what they've always buried. They would need to stop choosing safety over sincerity. And that kind of transformation takes more than love. It takes courage. It takes accountability. It takes losing someone they thought would always be there. That's why most avoidants don't change in the relationship. They change in the aftermath, when the silence stops being comforting and starts sounding like regret. When the person who always waited finally walks away for good. When they realize that control wasn't safety, it was isolation. That's when they break. Quietly, privately, alone. They start remembering the small things you did, the laughter, the way you looked at them, without judgment, the way you stayed patient, even when they gave you distance. And those memories start haunting them because they can't undo the way you love them. They can only watch as the love they once feared turns into the peace they now crave. And maybe, months later, they'll reach out. Maybe they'll test the waters again. Maybe they'll send that message. But you'll notice something. It won't hit the same. Not because you're cold, but because you're healed. You don't need their validation anymore. You don't need their words to confirm your worth. You see the pattern now. You see how your love became their safety net and how walking away became your freedom. That's when you finally understand. The real power was never in the apology. It was in your ability to live like you never needed it. Because when you stop waiting for them to change, you stop orbiting around their wounds. You start orbiting around your peace. And that peace becomes something they can't forget. Not because you punished them, but because you grew. Because you chose peace over proving a point. That's what healing looks like. When silence doesn't hurt anymore. When memories stop being a weight and start being wisdom. They'll still think of you sometimes. Not with hate, but with heaviness. Because you became the moment they finally saw themselves clearly and couldn't bear it. But you'll smile because you'll know you didn't lose anything. You just stopped begging for the love you already deserved. Healing after an avoidant is not loud. It doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives like the morning, quietly, softly, without asking permission. You just start noticing that your peace no longer depends on what they do or don't say, that the silence you once feared has become the very thing that saves you. Because silence, once it stops hurting, turns into space. And space is what your soul needed all along. You begin to understand that not everyone who triggers you is meant to stay. Some people appear to show you the wound. you forgot to tend. And the avoidant, they were the mirror that reflected your own unmet needs. They showed you how much you were willing to bend for love that never bent for you. They showed you how much you gave just to keep connection alive. But in doing that, they also revealed something sacred. That love is not about convincing, it's about being met. Because love without safety is just survival disguised as devotion. And you? You were tired of surviving. You wanted softness, truth, consistency. You wanted to feel seen, not studied, heard, not analyzed. And for a while, you thought if you just loved harder, if you just stayed longer, if you just explained yourself clearer, they'd finally understand. But the avoidant doesn't hear love through closeness, they hear it through distance. Every step closer feels like a threat to their autonomy. Every I miss you feels like a request they can't fulfill. Every act of affection reminds them how unsafe vulnerability still feels. So they retreat, not because you did something wrong, but because intimacy touches the one place. They've never learned to stand still. And you kept reaching into their silence, trying to find the person you fell in love with. But the truth is, the person you loved was the glimpse of who they could be if they weren't afraid. And you can't build a future on potential. You can love it, you can see it, but you can't stay for it. Because potential is the promise of change that never arrives on time. So when you finally walk away, you're not abandoning them. You're honoring yourself. You're saying, I can love you and still not wait for you to heal. You're saying, I deserve love that doesn't require losing myself to earn it. And that realization, it shifts everything. Because once you stop chasing what's unavailable, you start attracting what's ready. You begin to feel your energy return. You laugh differently. You sleep deeper. You notice how peaceful it feels when your nervous system is no longer wired to chaos. You see now that their distance was never personal. It was patterned, a cycle born from their own fear of loss, their own history of rejection, their own need to stay safe, even if it meant being alone. You just happened to love them deeply enough to expose the conflict they never wanted to face. That's why they ran, not from you, but from the reflection of themselves that your love created. You represented the emotional closeness they were conditioned to avoid. So when you pulled away and didn't come back, they felt something they hadn't felt before, a loss they couldn't control. Because avoidance works. As long as someone chases, distance feels safe. As long as someone tries to close it. But when you stop trying, their system panicked. Not because of love, but because they lost control of how they were seen. They used to be the one deciding the rhythm, when to pull close, when to push away. Now the rhythm is gone, and silence feels like punishment. But for you, that silence became power. It became the sound of your peace returning. It became the rhythm of your healing. And maybe that's the irony. The same silence that broke you is now the silence that rebuilds you. You start realizing that the apology you wanted wasn't about the words. It was about recognition. You wanted them to see you, to finally acknowledge the effort, the love, the patience. But here's the truth. Some people can't see love while they're still hiding from themselves. They'll look back one day and recognize it. But by then, you'll already be standing in a peace that doesn't require remembering. And that's when life gets poetic. Because just when you've stopped checking, they'll start remembering. Just when you've stopped hoping, they'll start feeling. Not because they've changed, but because your absence finally gave their feelings room to exist. Avoidance often feel most when the other person stops managing the connection. when the silence stretches too far, when there's no one left to chase the distance away. That's when the grief hits. That's when realization dawns. That's when the apology forms in the quiet corners of their mind. But here's what healing does. It teaches you to stop needing that apology, to feel closure. Because closure isn't hearing, "I'm sorry." It's being able to look at what happened and still choose peace. It's saying, "I understand why you couldn't meet me there, and I release you anyway." That's power. That's healing. That's love without attachment. You stop seeing them as someone who needs to come back. You start seeing them as a teacher you didn't know you asked for. They taught you what your boundaries are. They taught you how much of yourself you gave away for the idea of belonging. They taught you that love without self-respect isn't love at all. It's a wound asking to be seen. And you answered it with your time, your softness, your compassion. But now, you answer it with your peace. Because real growth isn't about forgetting them. It's about remembering yourself. You start moving differently. You stop performing for attention. You stop trying to earn comfort. You stop mistaking inconsistency for mystery. You start craving clarity, stability, honesty. And ironically, the more you live like that, the more your energy changes. You become grounded, calm, whole. That's the version of you they never got to meet, the one who no longer needs them. And that's when they feel it. That's when the guilt settles in, when they realize they lost the one person who saw them beneath the armor and loved them anyway. They'll think about coming back. They'll rehearse the apology. They'll imagine the words. "I didn't know what I had. I wasn't ready. I see it now." But even if they say it, you'll know you don't need it anymore. Because the healing isn't in their return, it's in your release. They'll feel the loss in moments you've already outgrown. They'll chase the version of you that doesn't exist anymore. Because the person you were, when you needed their love, was still learning what love really is. Now, you know. You know love doesn't chase. It flows. It expands. It holds space. But it never begs to be chosen. And you'll never forget that again. When you stop chasing closure, something strange happens. The avoidant begins to feel what you once felt. Not immediately, but quietly, in the pauses of their own solitude. Because the moment you stop needing them to apologize, they begin to realize what their silence cost. Not just you, but them. They start to see the difference between being left alone and being truly at peace. And for the first time, peace doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like loss. Because peace, without your warmth, is hollow. It's the kind of quiet that echoes, the kind that doesn't protect, the kind that haunts. They'll go back to the old patterns for a while, convincing themselves they were right to pull away, telling themselves they were protecting their space. But the story doesn't sound convincing anymore. Not when they replay the way you looked at them, not with demand, but with softness. That softness was never the problem. It was the mirror. And mirrors terrify the avoidant because they don't just reflect what's around them. They reflect what's missing inside them. When you loved them, you didn't just offer affection. You offered reflection. You showed them the version of themselves that could have stayed, that could have trusted, that could have let love in. And when you stopped needing their apology, you took away their final excuse. They could no longer say, "I'm not enough for you," because you were no longer asking them to be. They could no longer hide behind, "You expect too much," because you weren't expecting anything at all. You were just living and healing. And that was the loudest thing of all. It's often said that healing is silent, but it isn't. It's thunder dressed as calm. Your detachment doesn't just free you. It confronts them. It forces them to meet the reality they've been running from. That love was never the danger. Intimacy was never the enemy. It was the safety they never learned to feel. And now, without you, they're left in the same safety they once begged for, only to find it feels like isolation. They realize that the apology you once wanted wasn't about guilt. It was about connection. It was about hearing, "I see now what I couldn't before." But instead, you give them something more powerful. You give them absence. And absence has a way of doing what words never could. It sits with them. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It just lingers. And in that space, they begin to feel the very thing they spent years trying not to: regret. Not because they lost someone, but because they pushed away the only version of love that wasn't trying to control them. They realized too late that your love never wanted to change them. It just wanted to reach them. And the moment they understand that, it's no longer something they can fix. It's just something they have to live with. That's the hidden truth about the avoidance apology. It rarely comes when you're waiting for it. It comes when you've stopped listening for it. When you've built a life that no longer orbits their silence. When you've found peace in the same place they found fear. Because your peace, that quiet, grounded, self-assured calm, is their mirror now. It's the reflection they can't escape. And though they might never say the words, you'll feel their apology in the small ways they reach out. When they think you're not looking, a message that sounds casual, a memory they suddenly bring up, a question they already know the answer to. It's not about rekindling, it's about reckoning. Because even they, the masters of emotional distance, can't hide from what their heart remembers. And that's you, the one who saw them before they could even see themselves, the one who didn't beg them to stay, the one who simply stopped chasing. And somehow, that's what finally makes them come closer. Not in the way they used to, not with promises or apologies, but with quiet awareness, a hesitation in their tone, a look that lingers too long. Because that's what healing does. It changes the gravity. You stop orbiting their world, and they start to feel the pull of yours. You become the calm they once called too much. You become the peace they mistook for boredom. You become the mirror they can't look away from. So when the avoidant finally apologizes, if they ever do, know this: it's not the words that matter. It's what had to happen for those words to exist. They had to lose your need. They had to face their reflection. They had to realize that silence doesn't save them anymore. And by then, you'll already be somewhere they never thought you'd go. Free. Free from proving your worth. Free from decoding their distance. Free from waiting for someone who couldn't meet you halfway. You'll see now that their apology was never the destination. It was the echo of everything you became when you stopped needing them to change. And maybe that's the real closure, not in what they finally say, but in what you no longer need to hear. Because healing isn't about being understood. It's about no longer being held hostage by the misunderstanding. And that's when you'll know you never needed their sorry. You just needed to stop living like it was the only thing that could set you free.